What would you do if you were thrown off a plane, abandoned in the middle of nowhere, and told you didn't belong, all because of how you look? This is the story of Snoop Dogg, a global icon who faced humiliation at 35,000 feet, survived the jungle, and turned his ordeal into a powerful fight for justice. If you like this story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It costs you nothing, but for us, especially in these early days, it means everything. Let's begin. Snoop Dogg leaned back in the plush leather seat, his signature sunglasses perched comfortably on his nose. This was the escape he'd been craving, a long overdue vacation to the pristine beaches of the Maldives. The private jet exuded luxury, with its ambient lighting, attentive crew, and quiet hum of the engines, making it feel more like a floating palace than an aircraft. It had been a whirlwind of commitments, tours, recording sessions, media appearances, and this trip was his way of hitting pause. For the first time in months, Snoop allowed himself to breathe deeply and embrace the serenity of the moment. The flight attendants moved gracefully through the cabin, offering drinks and snacks to passengers, a mix of business tycoons, celebrities, and jet-setters. Snoop could feel their occasional glances, some recognizing him but keeping their distance out of respect or intimidation. "Here you go, Mr. Broadus," a smiling flight attendant said, handing him a glass of freshly pressed juice. "Let me know if there's anything else you need." Snoop raised the glass in a mock toast, flashing his signature charm. "Appreciate it. Y'all really outdid yourselves with this setup." The plane taxied smoothly to the runway, and as it lifted off, Snoop gazed out the window at the receding city lights. He felt the familiar thrill of flight, a mix of liberation and anticipation. Pulling out his tablet, he began jotting ideas for a new track. The steady vibrations of the plane blended with the beats in his head, creating a rhythm that inspired creativity. But amid the peace, a subtle tension lingered. Perhaps it was the way the captain's voice sounded over the intercom, too sharp and detached as he announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're now cruising at 35,000 feet. We hope you enjoy your flight to the Maldives." The announcement wasn't odd in itself, but the tone caught Snoop's attention. Something about it felt off. Brushing the thought aside, he leaned back, allowing the hum of the engines to lull him into a light doze. As the cabin lights dimmed to signal nighttime, Snoop thought about how far he'd come. The fame, the success, it hadn't been an easy road, but here he was, finally giving himself permission to relax. However, fate had other plans. The first sign came moments later when the intercom crackled to life again. The captain's voice, sharper now, cut through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to extend a special welcome to a celebrity guest on board, Mr. Snoop Dogg. We hope he enjoys the luxury of our skies." The words hung in the air, but the tone wasn't welcoming. Snoop's brows furrowed behind his sunglasses. It wasn't what was said, it was how it was said. Little did he know, this would be the calm before the storm. The plane cruised smoothly through the night sky, its dimmed lights giving the cabin a serene glow. Passengers reclined in their seats, some watching movies, others chatting quietly. Snoop Dogg, however, couldn't shake the strange vibe that had come with the captain's announcement. Leaning forward, he grabbed his headphones and scrolled through his playlist, hoping to drown out the nagging unease. The beats filled his ears, grounding him in the familiar rhythm that had been the soundtrack of his life. Snoop thought back to the days when nothing came easy, when the hustle wasn't about private jets or luxury vacations but about survival. Growing up in Long Beach had taught him resilience. He'd faced his share of skepticism, gatekeeping, and outright hostility. But no matter how many barriers were thrown his way, he'd broken through them all. "Just another day," he muttered under his breath, shaking off the growing tension. A flight attendant approached, breaking his thoughts. Her smile was polite, but her eyes darted nervously toward the cockpit. "Mr. Broadus, can I get you anything else?" "Nah, I'm good," he replied smoothly, flashing a reassuring grin. "Y'all handling everything just fine." She nodded but hesitated before walking away, her expression betraying unease. Snoop caught it but didn't press. A faint whispering started from nearby passengers. He couldn't make out their words, but he could feel their eyes flicking toward him. He adjusted his sunglasses, deciding to ignore it. People were always curious about him. It came with the territory. Minutes turned into an hour. The calm hum of the engines filled the cabin, but something felt off. Snoop noticed the flight attendants exchanging hushed words near the galley, their movements hurried. One of them glanced in his direction before disappearing behind the curtain separating the cabin from the cockpit. The intercom crackled to life again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I hope everyone is enjoying the flight. I just wanted to take a moment to remind everyone to remain seated as we've entered international airspace. Thank you for your cooperation." The tone was clipped, almost aggressive. Snoop glanced around the cabin. While most passengers seemed unfazed, a few were glancing at him with growing curiosity. The captain emerged moments later, stepping into the aisle. He was tall and broad-shouldered with a crisp uniform and a look of authority. But there was something else. His eyes carried an edge, a hardness that seemed out of place. As the captain moved down the aisle, he greeted passengers briefly, exchanging polite words and nods. When he reached Snoop's row, he paused, his expression shifting. "Mr. Broaddus," the captain said, his voice measured but tinged with something unspoken. "Enjoying the flight?" Snoop nodded, keeping his tone casual. "Sure am. Y'all running a tight ship here. Appreciate it." The captain didn't smile. Instead, his gaze lingered a moment too long, as if assessing Snoop. "Good to hear. We like to make sure all our passengers are comfortable." There was an emphasis on the last word that didn't sit right. Snoop raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The captain moved on, but the brief exchange left an unsettling aftertaste. Snoop leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. This wasn't the first time someone had sized him up, questioned his presence in spaces they thought he didn't belong. But this was different. There was a boldness to the captain's demeanor that felt personal. He reached for his tablet, hoping to distract himself. But before he could start writing again, the captain's voice echoed through the cabin once more. "Mr. Broaddus, please remain in your seat. I'll be addressing you shortly." The murmurs began almost instantly. Passengers turned in their seats, some outright staring. Snoop felt a wave of irritation rise but forced himself to remain calm. He'd been in the public eye long enough to know that losing his composure would only make things worse. The captain reappeared, flanked by two flight attendants. He strode directly toward Snoop, his posture rigid, his expression a mask of cold authority. "Mr. Broaddus," he said sharply, "I need to verify some information regarding your presence on this flight." Snoop took off his headphones and tilted his head. "What kind of information?" "I booked this flight fair and square. Everything's in order." The captain crossed his arms, his stance confrontational. "I'll be the judge of that. You don't exactly look like the type to fit the profile of a first-class passenger on a private jet." The words hit like a slap. Snoop blinked, momentarily stunned by the blatant audacity. Around him, passengers gasped, their expressions a mix of shock and discomfort. "A man like me?" Snoop said evenly, his tone calm but edged with disbelief. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means," the captain snapped. "People like you, troublemakers, criminals, you don't belong here." The cabin fell silent. Snoop clenched his fists under the table, his patience wearing thin. He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "Listen, man, I don't know what your problem is, but I'm not here for this drama. Check your records. You'll see everything's legit." The captain smirked, his arrogance on full display. "We'll see about that." Turning sharply, he marched back to the cockpit, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. Snoop leaned back, exhaling slowly. The other passengers avoided his gaze, their discomfort palpable. He could feel their judgment, their curiosity, their reluctance to intervene. Deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. Snoop sat still, his hands resting on the armrests as he replayed the interaction with the captain in his mind. The words troublemaker and criminal echoed, each syllable a reminder of the prejudice he'd spent a lifetime overcoming. He glanced around the cabin, catching snippets of hushed conversations and stolen glances. The once serene atmosphere now felt charged, every movement tinged with unease. One flight attendant, a young woman with kind eyes, approached cautiously. She leaned down, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Broaddus, I'm so sorry about this. I don't know what's going on, but we're trying to keep everything calm." Snoop nodded, appreciating her effort but knowing her words offered little solace. "Ain't on you," he said quietly. "Just do your job and stay out of trouble." She hesitated, then stepped away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The plane continued its steady course, the hum of the engines now feeling oppressive. Snoop reached for his tablet again, determined to focus on something productive. He opened a new document and began typing. A few lines of a song, words that mirrored the turbulence in his mind. Locked in a flight, turbulence of the soul. Judged by the skin, a story so old. He paused, staring at the screen. The lyrics felt raw, almost too close to home. Before he could write more, the intercom crackled to life. "Mr. Broaddus," the captain's voice boomed, sharp and commanding, "I need you to prepare to disembark at our next landing. This is for the safety of everyone on board." The announcement sent a ripple of confusion through the cabin. Murmurs turned into audible whispers, passengers leaning toward each other in disbelief. Snoop's jaw tightened as he removed his headphones. "Man, you gotta be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. He looked around, catching the concerned eyes of a few passengers. But no one spoke up. The young flight attendant from earlier returned, her face pale. I think he's serious," she stammered. "He's insisting that you leave," Snoop interrupted, his voice calm but laced with steel. "I ain't done a thing wrong, and he knows it." She looked away, guilt etched across her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered before retreating. Minutes later, the captain stormed down the aisle again, his posture rigid and his expression unreadable. He stopped in front of Snoop's seat, towering over him. "I've made myself clear," the captain said, his voice cold. "Gather your things. You're leaving this flight." Snoop leaned back, crossing his arms. "I ain't going anywhere. I paid for this seat, just like everybody else. You got a problem, you deal with it." The captain's eyes narrowed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he hissed. Snoop met his gaze evenly. "Nah, man, you're the one making it hard." The tension was unbearable, the silence deafening as passengers watched the exchange. Some shifted uncomfortably while others openly stared, their faces a mix of shock and unease. The captain turned sharply, barking orders to the flight attendants. "Prepare for an emergency landing," he snapped. Snoop's heart sank. This wasn't about safety, this was personal. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, willing himself to stay calm. The plane descended rapidly, the change in altitude noticeable. Outside the window, dense greenery replaced the vast expanse of ocean. Snoop watched as the jet approached a small, desolate airstrip surrounded by jungle. When the wheels touched down, the plane jolted slightly before rolling to a stop. The captain emerged once again, flanked by two male crew members. His expression was triumphant, as if he'd won some unspoken battle. "Out!" he said, pointing toward the exit. Snoop stood slowly, towering over the captain despite the calm in his demeanor. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice low and steady. The captain smirked. "Get off my plane." Snoop grabbed his bag, slinging it over his shoulder. As he walked toward the exit, he turned to the other passengers. "Y'all see this, right?" he said, his voice carrying through the cabin. "Y'all know this ain't right." The silence was deafening. A few passengers looked down, avoiding his gaze, while others shifted uncomfortably. Stepping off the plane, Snoop felt the oppressive heat of the jungle hit him, The door slammed shut behind him, and moments later the engines roared to life. He watched as the jet lifted off, disappearing into the sky. Snoop stood on the tarmac, taking in his surroundings. The airstrip was deserted, save for a dilapidated shed on the far side. Dense jungle stretched endlessly in every direction, the sounds of wildlife filling the air. "All right," he muttered to himself, "let's figure this out." He made his way toward the shed, his boots crunching against the gravel. Inside, the space was empty, save for a few rusted tools and a broken radio. Frustration bubbled within him, but he refused to let it take over. "This ain't the first time you've been left to fend for yourself," he thought, the words a reminder of the resilience that had carried him this far. As night fell, the jungle came alive with sounds, rustling leaves, distant howls, and the hum of insects. Snoop leaned against a tree, exhaustion creeping in. He thought about his family, his fans, and the life he'd built. How had it come to this? But giving up wasn't an option. Hours later, a faint light flickered in the distance. Hope surged within him, and he pushed himself forward, ignoring the pain in his legs. The light grew brighter, revealing a small village nestled in the jungle. As he stepped into the clearing, villagers turned to look at him, their faces a mix of caution and curiosity. A young man near the edge of the group gasped. "Yo, is that Snoop Dogg?" he exclaimed, his voice tinged with disbelief. The tension broke immediately. A chorus of murmurs spread through the crowd, and people began to gather around him, their expressions shifting to recognition and concern. "You all right, man?" one of the villagers asked, stepping forward. He was tall and muscular, his tone warm and reassuring. "Been better," Snoop replied, forcing a tired smile. The villagers ushered him into one of the larger huts, offering food, water, and a place to rest. As he sat down, the reality of his situation began to sink in. They didn't just save him, they gave him hope. Snoop sat in the hut, his body finally beginning to relax after hours of tension. The villagers moved around him, speaking in a language he didn't fully understand, yet their kindness transcended words. Plates of food were placed in front of him, simple but hearty meals that filled the empty pit in his stomach. A boy no older than 10 sat beside him, his wide eyes filled with curiosity. "Are you really Snoop Dogg?" the boy asked in halting English. Snoop chuckled softly, nodding. "That's me, lil' man." The boy's face lit up. "My dad listens to your music. He says you're a big man in America." Snoop smiled, humbled by the boy's innocence. "Big man, huh? Well, your dad sounds like he's got good taste." The boy grinned and ran off, returning moments later with an old, battered cassette tape. "Will you sign this?" "Of course," Snoop said, taking the tape and signing it with a flourish. It was a small moment, but it reminded him of the connection he had with people worldwide, something no captain or prejudice could take away. As night deepened, the village came alive with a quiet hum of activity. Villagers brought Snoop clothes to replace his sweat-soaked attire, and a woman skillfully tended to the scrapes on his arms and legs. "You rest now," one of the men said, his English broken but clear. "Tomorrow, we help you get back home." Snoop nodded, gratitude etched on his face. "Thank you. Y'all don't know what this means to me." Lying on the cot, surrounded by the faint sounds of the jungle, Snoop allowed himself to reflect. He thought about the captain's words, the humiliation he'd endured, and the deafening silence of the other passengers. It wasn't just about him. It was about the countless others who faced similar discrimination without the platform to fight back. "I can't let this slide," he whispered to himself. "Not this time." The next morning, the villagers gathered to discuss how they could help Snoop. A man named Jamal, who spoke the best English, took the lead. "We will call authorities," Jamal said. "But here, no airport nearby. We find a way." Snoop appreciated their determination. "Anything y'all can do, I'm grateful." Jamal nodded. "You are famous, yes? Maybe news help?" Snoop hesitated. He'd spent the past day avoiding thoughts of his fame, but Jamal's words planted an idea. If the story got out, it could spark the outrage needed to hold the captain accountable. "Yeah," Snoop said finally, "the world needs to know what went down." With Jamal's help, Snoop recorded a short video using an old smartphone. Standing in the center of the village, he recounted the events of the flight, from the captain's hostility to being abandoned in the jungle. "This ain't just about me," he said, his voice steady. "It's about every person who's been made to feel like they don't belong. We gotta call this out when we see it. Enough is enough." Jamal promised to send the video to a journalist he knew in the nearest city. "This will reach people," he said confidently. Meanwhile, Snoop spent the day bonding with the villagers. He shared stories about his life, his music, and the journey that brought him here. In turn, they shared their own struggles, tales of resilience in the face of poverty and isolation. One boy, the same one who'd asked for Snoop's autograph, stayed close by, listening intently. "I want to be a musician like you," he said quietly. Snoop looked at him, seeing the spark of determination in his eyes. "You can be anything you want, little man. Just keep your head up and don't let nobody tell you different." The boy beamed, his hope renewed. By the next evening, Jamal returned with news. "Your video is everywhere," he said, holding up his phone to show Snoop the headlines. The footage had gone viral, shared by major outlets and social media platforms. Comments poured in from fans, celebrities, and activists, all expressing outrage and solidarity. The hashtag #JusticeForSnoop began trending, sparking a nationwide conversation about racism and discrimination in travel. Snoop felt a wave of relief mixed with determination. "We ain't done yet," he said. As arrangements were made to get Snoop back to the U.S., the airline's corporate office issued a statement, claiming the incident was a misunderstanding and promising an internal investigation. But the public wasn't buying it. "You gonna call that a misunderstanding when the pilot left me in the jungle?" Snoop said in a follow-up video. "Nah, man, y'all gotta do better." The backlash grew, with protests forming outside the airline's headquarters. Activists demanded accountability, not just for Snoop's experience but for systemic changes in how travelers were treated. Finally, Snoop boarded a small plane chartered by the villagers and local authorities. Before leaving, he addressed the crowd that had gathered to see him off. "Y'all saved me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I ain't ever gonna forget that, and I'm gonna make sure the world don't forget it either." The villagers cheered, and the young boy ran up to give him a parting gift, a small wooden carving of a lion. "For strength," the boy said shyly. Snoop took it, holding it tightly. "I'll keep it close," he promised. As the plane lifted off, Snoop looked out the window, the jungle receding into the distance. The journey wasn't over, but he was ready for the fight ahead. As the plane touched down in Los Angeles, Snoop felt a mix of relief and apprehension. He'd made it out of the jungle, but the battle was far from over. Crowds of fans and reporters had gathered outside the airport, their voices rising in a cacophony of cheers, questions, and demands for answers. Snoop stepped out onto the tarmac, flanked by his manager Kevin and a few close friends. His limp was slight, but the bruises from his ordeal still ached. Cameras flashed and microphones were thrust toward him, the questions coming rapid fire. "What happened on the flight, Snoop? Do you think this was racially motivated? What are you planning to do next?" Snoop raised a hand, silencing the crowd with his calm but commanding presence. "We'll talk soon," he said firmly. "Right now, I just want to get home and see my family." The crowd parted as he climbed into a waiting SUV. Kevin sat beside him, his phone buzzing non-stop with messages from lawyers, journalists, and supporters. "Man, this thing's blown up," Kevin said, scrolling through his feed. "Celebrities are backing you, activists are calling for boycotts, and the airline's getting hammered online." Snoop nodded, his gaze fixed out the window. "Good," he said, "but it ain't enough. That captain's got to answer for what he did." At home, Snoop's children ran to greet him, their hugs grounding him in a way nothing else could. His wife, Shante, embraced him tightly, her eyes filled with both worry and pride. "You okay, baby?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Snoop said, his voice steady. "I'm good now." Later that night, as the house quieted, he sat in his home studio, surrounded by the familiar comfort of his equipment. But instead of working on music, he opened his laptop and began drafting a statement. The world needed to know the truth, and he was ready to tell it. The next morning, Snoop went live on all his social media platforms. His face filled the screen, a mix of calm and determination. "Yo, what's up, y'all? It's your boy Snoop. I know you've been hearing about what went down, so let me break it down for you," he began. He recounted the events of the flight, sparing no detail. The captain's hostility, the public humiliation, being abandoned in the jungle, it was all laid bare. "This ain't just about me," he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "It's about a system that thinks it can treat people different just because of how they look. Nah, man, we ain't standing for that no more." Within hours, the video went viral. Celebrities like LeBron James, Rihanna, and Oprah shared it, adding their voices to the growing outrage. The hashtag #JusticeForSnoop dominated social media, with millions calling for accountability. Meanwhile, Kevin worked tirelessly behind the scenes assembling a legal team. The group was led by a renowned civil rights attorney named Dana Collins, whose fiery speeches and unyielding dedication to justice had earned her a reputation as a powerhouse in the courtroom. "We're filing a lawsuit," Dana told Snoop during their first meeting, "not just against the captain, but against the airline. They need to answer for their employees' actions." Snoop leaned back in his chair, nodding. "Let's make it happen." As the lawsuit gained traction, the airline scrambled to contain the fallout. Executives issued a formal apology, calling the incident unfortunate and promising an investigation. But the public wasn't satisfied. Protests erupted outside the airline's headquarters, with demonstrators holding signs that read, "No justice, no flights," and "Accountability now." News outlets covered the story extensively, featuring interviews with passengers who had been on the flight. One businessman who had initially remained silent came forward to confirm Snoop's account. "I saw the whole thing," he said during a televised interview. "The captain's behavior was unprofessional and discriminatory. There's no excuse for it." Another witness, a flight attendant, anonymously shared her experience. "We were all scared," she admitted. "The captain was aggressive, and we didn't know how to intervene." Despite the mounting support, Snoop faced criticism from some corners. Online trolls questioned his version of events, accusing him of exaggerating for attention. News pundits debated the incident, with some dismissing it as a misunderstanding. Snoop refused to be deterred. "They can say what they want," he told Kevin during a late-night conversation. "The truth's gonna come out." Dana Collins filed the lawsuit within weeks, citing discrimination, endangerment, and abuse of authority. The legal team worked tirelessly to build their case, gathering evidence that included security footage from the airstrip where Snoop had been abandoned. The video was damning. It showed the captain shoving Snoop toward the tarmac, tossing his belongings, and leaving him stranded. The footage was leaked to the media, sparking another wave of outrage. "This is what we're fighting against," Snoop said during a press conference. "This right here? This ain't just about me. It's about making sure nobody else has to go through this." The tension escalated as the trial date approached. Snoop prepared for his day in court, knowing the stakes were bigger than his personal experience. "You ready for this?" Dana asked him before the first hearing. Snoop nodded. "Been ready my whole life." The courtroom was packed on the first day, with journalists, activists, and supporters filling every seat. Cameras outside captured the moment Snoop stepped out of his car, flanked by his legal team. Inside, the captain sat at the defendant's table, his expression defiant. His lawyers argued that his actions were justified by safety concerns, but their narrative quickly unraveled under scrutiny. Witnesses testified about the captain's hostility and the events leading up to Snoop's ejection. The flight attendant who had apologized to Snoop spoke tearfully, describing how powerless she had felt to stop the injustice. "It wasn't right," she said, her voice trembling. "None of it was right." As the trial continued, tensions ran high. The airline's defense team attempted to discredit Snoop, bringing up old controversies in an effort to undermine his credibility. But Dana was relentless, redirecting the focus to the captain's actions. "This isn't about Mr. Broaddus's past," she argued. "This is about the abuse of power and the prejudice that fueled it." The turning point came when Dana presented evidence of the captain's history of misconduct. Records revealed that he had faced multiple complaints from passengers and crew members in the past, including one incident where another passenger was quietly compensated to avoid bad press. "This is a pattern," Dana declared, "and it ends now." The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. The jury's expressions hardened, and the captain's defense team visibly faltered. As the trial neared its conclusion, Snoop delivered a statement that brought the room to a standstill. "I've been through a lot in my life," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "But this ain't just about me. This is about standing up to the people who think they can treat us like we're less than. We deserve better, and we ain't stopping until we get it." The courtroom erupted in applause, the energy palpable. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to deliver instructions to the jury. Every seat was occupied, the air thick with tension. Snoop sat at the plaintiff's table, his expression calm but resolute. Beside him, Dana Collins shuffled her notes, her sharp gaze locked on the defense team, who now appeared visibly deflated. The trial had stretched on for weeks, but the weight of evidence was undeniable. Witness testimonies, leaked footage, and the captain's history of misconduct had painted a damning picture. Even so, the final moments felt like an eternity. "All rise," the bailiff announced as the jury returned to the courtroom. Everyone stood, holding their breath as the foreperson handed the verdict to the judge. Snoop's heart pounded as the judge scanned the paper. Then, in a clear, steady voice, the verdict was read. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Captain Richard Wallace, guilty on all counts, including discrimination, assault, and unlawful endangerment." The words echoed in the courtroom, followed by a wave of cheers and applause from the gallery. Snoop exhaled deeply, the tension leaving his body in a rush. Dana placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, her smile one of quiet triumph. The judge's sentencing was swift and uncompromising. Captain Wallace was stripped of his pilot's license and sentenced to 5 years in prison for his actions. The airline, facing immense public backlash, announced a sweeping overhaul of its policies, including mandatory diversity training and stricter oversight of its employees. Outside the courthouse, a sea of supporters awaited Snoop's statement. Cameras flashed as he stepped up to the podium, his towering presence amplified by the significance of the moment. "This ain't just my win," he began, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "This is for everybody who's ever been told they don't belong, who's ever been judged by the way they look or where they come from. Today, we sent a message. Enough is enough." The crowd erupted in applause, chants of "Justice for Snoop" ringing out across the square. Over the following weeks, the story continued to dominate headlines. The airline's public apology included a commitment to fund initiatives supporting diversity and inclusion in the travel industry. Other airlines followed suit, announcing similar reforms. Snoop used the momentum to launch a campaign aimed at addressing systemic discrimination, partnering with civil rights organizations to push for broader change. The hashtag #FlyWithRespect gained traction, encouraging people to share their own experiences of injustice while demanding accountability from institutions. But amidst the whirlwind of advocacy and media appearances, Snoop never forgot the village that had saved him. 1 month after the trial, Snoop returned to the jungle village, this time with a team of builders and resources to support the community. He met with Jamal and the other villagers, outlining plans to construct a school, improve infrastructure, and provide scholarships for the children. During the visit, He sought out the young boy who had inspired him with his dream of becoming a musician. "You still got that tape I signed?" Snoop asked, crouching down to the boy's level. The boy nodded eagerly, pulling the worn cassette from his pocket. "Well, I got something for you," Snoop said, handing the boy a brand new guitar. The boy's eyes widened with disbelief, his hands trembling as he accepted the gift. "Keep practicing," Snoop said, ruffling the boy's hair. "One day, you're going to play for the whole world." Back in Los Angeles, Snoop continued to balance his advocacy work with his music career. His ordeal had not only reignited his determination, but also deepened his connection with his fans, who saw him as more than just a rapper. They saw him as a symbol of resilience and justice. One evening, during a sold-out concert, Snoop paused between songs to address the crowd. "Y'all know what went down," he said, his voice resonating through the arena. "But what I learned through all this, it's that we're stronger together. When we stand up for what's right, when we got each other's backs, that's when we win." The crowd roared in agreement, their energy electrifying the space. Months after the trial, life had settled into a new rhythm for Snoop. The weight of the ordeal had transformed into a renewed sense of purpose. He had turned his pain into progress, his struggle into strength, and the world had taken notice. The airline's reforms became a model for change across the industry, sparking conversations in boardrooms and communities worldwide. Civil rights organizations hailed the trial as a landmark victory, and Snoop's campaign continued to gain momentum. The hashtag #FlyWithRespect became a symbol of accountability and unity, bridging divides and inspiring action. One quiet evening, Snoop revisited the small wooden carving the boy from the village had given him, a lion for strength. He placed it on his desk, a reminder of the kindness he had encountered when he needed it most. His thoughts drifted to the boy and the village, now thriving with new opportunities. The school was under construction. Scholarships had been awarded, and the boy, now with his new guitar, was recording his first song with the help of local musicians. "You got this, lil' man," Snoop whispered, a proud smile spreading across his face. Not long after, Snoop found himself on another flight, this time with a supportive and welcoming crew. The plane cruised smoothly at 35,000 feet, the atmosphere light and free of tension. The captain, a middle-aged black woman with a calm demeanor, personally greeted him before takeoff. "Mr. Broadus," she said warmly, extending her hand. "It's an honor to have you on board. Let us know if there's anything you need." Snoop shook her hand, appreciating the stark contrast to his previous experience. "Y'all already done enough," he said with a genuine smile. As the plane descended toward the Maldives, the turquoise waters and white sands came into view. This time, there was no tension, no hostility, only peace and the anticipation of a well-deserved vacation. Standing on the shore of his beachfront villa, Snoop recorded a short video for his fans. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the ocean as waves gently lapped at his feet. "What's up, y'all?" he said, his voice steady and confident. "I just want to thank everybody who stood with me through all this. This ain't just my win, it's ours. Together, we made some real change, and we're going to keep fighting until everybody gets the respect they deserve." He paused, letting the sound of the waves fill the moment. "Remember, it ain't about how many times they knock you down. It's about how you get back up. Stay strong, stay real, and keep pushing for what's right." He uploaded the video, slipped his phone into his pocket, and turned toward the ocean. The horizon stretched endlessly before him, a symbol of the future he was determined to shape. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a brighter, stronger chapter.